Good morning. Oh, that works. Okay. We have these mics set up, which is why this mic doesn't work. I'm Associate Dean Brianne Davila from the College of Letters, Arts, and Social Sciences. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I just have a few logistical announcements before I invite Dr. Neil Chaturvedi up to do the more formal welcome. I want to start by thanking our sponsors for this event. So primarily the Office of Student Success, Dora Lee's office. Her team really helped with the logistics and the planning and supporting all the things, and they are featured over here at this table. Thank you. I also want to recognize Dr. Neil Chaturvedi, who is the director of the Michie and Walter Wegelin Endowed Chair in Multicultural Studies and a political scientist in class, and also Dr. Alejandro Morales, who's the director of the McNair Scholars Program. Any McNair Scholars in the room? Woo! Me too. And also a professor of psychology in class. I want to recognize my dream team, Ashley, Noel, and Lydia, who help make all things possible. We do have some index cards on the tables in case questions arise as the talk is going on. So please feel free to write your questions down. We'll have time at the end for Q&A. If you prefer to raise your hand, we'll bring a mic over to you. And we are doing a raffle. If you did not get a raffle ticket, please find Lydia, who has a cup of raffle tickets in her hand. She will gladly get you a raffle ticket. We're raffling off copies of the book, and class council has sponsored some gift card giveaways. And we also have fabulous staff from the bookstore here selling copies of the book for $20. So you can also purchase one if you aren't a winner in our raffle today. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. And now I welcome Dr. Chaturvedi.
All right, good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here for a few different reasons. First of all, as Dr. Davila said, I am the director for the Wegelin Endowed Chair for Multicultural Studies. It has been a conscious effort for us this year to get involved in these types of issues, these types of events to help support our students. So in that sense, it is definitely an honor to be here. It's also an honor to be here as a first-generation graduate myself. I went to UC Riverside. I know firsthand how challenging it can be to navigate the path through college and beyond. As our undergraduates in the room could probably attest to, it is incredibly difficult to not have family to rely on, sometimes not have friends to rely on for a roadmap on how to succeed. Back when I was in college, there were so many hurdles, from figuring out financial aid to balancing paying student fees to class schedules, making sure I was on track to graduation. And then, of course, there's the big question of, okay, and now I'm going to graduate, now what, right? For me, I was a political science major. The obvious choice for us, for many of our students, and we try to discourage this as much as possible, because there are other choices, there are other paths, but the obvious one that everybody kind of gets shoved into is law school. And for me, I just could not picture practicing law. And that's not to say anything about practicing law, but for me, it just wasn't me. And that hit a dead end for me, and I didn't know what to do. Was it go to the workforce? I didn't know what to do. I was a first-gen student. I didn't know what the options were. And I stumbled into a research opportunity with a faculty member, one, because I needed money and he was paying, and two, because he studied American politics and I thought the work that he was doing was really engaging and fun. And he said, hey, you're really good at this. Does this interest you? Because you know you could make this a career. I had no idea what he was talking about. But after several meetings and talking with him, and he took me out to lunch and was just a great person, I learned that graduate school was an option. That's how I got my PhD and now a faculty member here. But it shouldn't be based on luck, right? It shouldn't be you stumble into a position, you stumble into an opportunity, and you learn about these opportunities. And so that's why I'm thankful for what we're doing here today. We're here to demystify the graduate school application process and make it accessible, especially for first-generation students and BIPOC students who may not have someone to guide them the way that I did. We want to make sure that each of you leaves here with the information, resources, and confidence to decide whether graduate school is for you. and to know, more importantly, how to pursue it if it is for you. To help us with that, we're fortunate to have two incredible speakers with us today. They both have experience in academic mentoring spaces and, of course, the topic of the day, graduate school. First, Dr. Yvette Martínez-Vu. Dr. Martínez-Vu is a grad school and productivity coach, consultant, and host of the globally ranked Grad School Femtoring Podcast. She's also the co-editor of the acclaimed Chicana Motherwork Anthology and the founder of Grad School Femtoring LLC, where she helps First-Gen BIPOC students reach their academic and personal goals. We're also joined by Dr. Miroslava Chávez-García, a professor of history at UC Santa Barbara, and the faculty director of the UCSB McNair Scholars Program. Dr. Chávez-García is the author of multiple books, including the book that we are raffling off today, Demystifying the Application Process for First-Gen, I'm losing my notes here, is Grad School for Me, and her work is focused on empowering underrepresented students in higher education and makes her uniquely positioned to speak to the challenges and possibilities that graduate school can offer all of you. So with that, let's give a warm welcome to our speakers who will share their insights, experiences, and practical advice to help you chart your own path.
Yes?
Yes.
Can everybody hear okay?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, wonderful. Thank you everyone for being here. We're thrilled to be presenting on demystifying grad school, empowering first-gen students through higher education. Thank you to Dr. Chaturvedi for that wonderful intro. And also before we get started, I just wanna give credit and have you all give a show of hands or a round of applause to Dr. Brianne Davila, to her team, and to all of our wonderful sponsors for today. Can we give them? We know from experience it's a lot of work to put on these types of events, and there's a lot of love and labor that goes into it, so just know that we really appreciate you for having us today. Now, I'm going to get us started by letting us all know what we're going to be covering today. Just making sure. So in terms of what we're going to cover, I know we're here to talk a little bit about our book, but what we really want to do is to make sure that this is not by accident and that everybody here who is interested in going to graduate school can get a shot at going to graduate school. We're going to be telling you a little bit more about who we are, why we do what we do, how we came to writing this book. We're going to talk about what is the information that you need to really demystify grad school, like what do you need to know to have a better understanding of that. We're also going to go over whether or not grad school makes sense for you, because it doesn't always make sense for everybody to pursue that. And then, of course, we're going to go over the grad admissions process, the highly interested topic of funding. Every time that we've presented on this topic, folks ask, can I fund it? Is it possible? How can I make it work financially? And then, of course, we are going to, can everybody still hear me?
Yeah, seems to be one.
We can always switch mics.
There you go. Just yourself.
I'm going to switch mics. All right, can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Shout out to everybody coming in. We're just getting started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Yvette, and I'm here with my co-author, Dr. Miroslava Chávez-García, and I was just sharing a little bit about the agenda of what we're going to be covering today. Feel free to grab any drinks, any food items, take a seat, and we're just getting started. So like I said, we're sharing more about who we are, what we do. We're sharing about demystifying the grad school application process so that everybody gets a chance to pursue that if that's something you're interested in. We're also going to be addressing the question of whether or not grad school makes sense for you. It might not. It might be, but we don't know. That's what we're going to cover too. We're also going to go over the grad admissions process, what to expect when you apply, the funding process, what your options are for funding. We're going to go over key takeaways, especially things that you need to consider as a first-gen student. And then, of course, we'll have time for Q&A. So keep those index cards handy. Take a note. If you have any questions, write them down on the index cards. You will get a chance for us to read those aloud. You can either add your name to it if you want us to mention your name that you asked that question, or you can leave it without a name and we will answer those questions anonymously. And then, of course, we'll also take questions verbally for folks who prefer that. So just keep that in mind. All right, so now to get started with the book is Grad School for Me, Demystifying the Application Process for First-Gen BIPOC Students. We wrote this book, we came together, we actually have this relationship. Doctora Miroslava is one of my femtors. I met her when she was the new faculty director of the UC Santa Barbara McNair Scholars Program. And at the time, I was working as the associate director of that program. And pretty early on, we discovered that we had a lot of parallels in our backstories as first-gen Chicanas. And even though I was on my way out, transitioning out from that position, we continued to nurture this relationship. And we hope that this topic of nurturing relationships is something that that stays with you today, because it was through nurturing this relationship that she came up to me and asked, when are you going to write a book? And I told her, I thought you'd never ask. And that was the start. Through her femtorship and support, we reached out to an editor. We got the contract with UC Press, and we decided we wanted to write an accessible, approachable, empowering guide for first-gen BIPOC students like us. It's the guide that we wish we had when we had so many questions as undergrads. We couldn't find a single resource that was for us and by us. So that's a little bit more about the book. And I also want to briefly share a little bit more about me and my backstory, and of course, Doctora Miros will also share more about herself. So in terms of who I am, I'm coming here as someone who is also first-gen. I'm a child of immigrants. I was born and raised in the Northeast San Fernando Valley here in SoCal. Anybody here from the Valley, familiar with the Valley? Yay! I was hoping there'd be at least one hand. I was raised primarily by a single mom. My mom became a single mom of 6 when my dad suddenly passed away of a brain aneurysm. At the time, he was 42, I was 12. As the eldest daughter, I took on a lot of responsibilities, and that pressure actually led me to having my sanctuary or my safe space was school and theater. I got involved in theater actually before my dad passed away. He forced me to audition for a theater show in 4th grade because I was so quiet, I was selectively mute, and he wanted me to break out of my shell. I auditioned, lo and behold, to my terror, I landed the lead role, and then I kept doing theater. So theater and education was big for me. And that led me to going to college. I was the first in my family to move out, to go to college. I went to UCLA. I didn't know what I was doing. I decided to major in English for no better reason than because I was tired of math and nearly failed a neuroscience class. Those were my only 3 options at the time. And in college, I continued doing theater, but people kept telling me, you can't make a career out of theater, out of acting, out of stage managing. And so what was the next best thing? I found out about McNair. And I went to an info session. I worked really hard on my application. I got interviewed, and I did not get into McNair. And after that, I decided to apply to another program called the Mellon Mace Undergraduate Research Fellowship. I didn't expect to get in, but I got in. I was part of the first cohort of 5 at UCLA, and that set me on an academic track. So from there, I went to grad school. I got a PhD in theater because I thought, again, the next best thing other than practicing theater was to study theater. Little did I know that research is a whole other beast. And so I got to graduate school, and that's where things really, really got interesting in terms of a lot of things happening in my life that set the foundation for what I do today. The first was that I started mentoring students. I became a grad mentor, and I realized, wow, I really, really love serving others. I have such a passion for supporting folks, and I kept that in the back of my head. The second thing was that I burnt out. I was that person just 24/7 doing work, and I burnt out so much that I developed what would become my first of several chronic illnesses. And that was a big reality check of I need to figure out a way to do this, whatever career I pursue, without making myself sick. And then the third thing was that I actually, you'll see in the picture, I have 2 pictures with my babies. I became a mom in grad school, and that's when I realized, hold up. I've been a traditional student all my life, and up to this point, I'm realizing there's so many populations on college campuses that need resources and support and advocacy. So that started my advocacy work, becoming a mom. And then, of course, after grad school, I had a really, really tough conversation with myself, and I realized I don't think I want to become a professor. I think I want to stay in student affairs and serve students directly. And that's how I started working at a scholarship center, then later for a McNair program. That's how we met. And then, of course, after that, I decided to make a big leap to pursue entrepreneurship, to be able to work with colleges and universities across the nation. And that's what I do now. That's what has led me to doing what I do now.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. It's a real honor to have you all here on a 10 a.m. on a Thursday. Not a Friday, but a Thursday. It's still tough. Really great to be here. I'm always inspired by hearing Yvette's story because I think, wow, I wish I would have been like her. I mean, she has so much different times, right? My generation, I went to undergrad in the 80s, late 80s, and grad school in the 90s, and we had a lot. We've gained a lot in those years, but certainly starting out was difficult. But I'm still so glad to be here and to share my story. These are 3 photos, and the first one's when I'm about 3 years old. I'm not quite sure the age, but I really love this picture because it takes me back to my roots. So I was born on the border in Mexicali, Baja California, so I'm an immigrant. My parents are immigrants as well. I was raised here in California for most of my life, but my father was a farm worker in the Imperial Valley. And here, I think I'm visiting him at the site. I always say, he's like, take your kid to school day. That was me there. And I think I'm eating an orange. It was very hot, and everybody knows the Imperial Valley. It's very hot. We lived in Holtville for a while, but Mexicali is where I was born. And so that photo always takes me back to my father working the farm. He was a bracero. He worked in farm work. And just reminds me of the things that we went through as an early childhood, so it takes me back to that. And I don't know, I enjoy seeing that picture. And the second photo is with me and my mother. We're vacationing in Mexico. I think we're in Guadalajara, that photo is from. But by that time, so I was, my family's from Aguascalientes. My father was a farm worker, so he was in Southern California. And so my brother and I were both born on the border, and then we moved to San Jose. That's where I was raised, in San Jose, California. My father was tired of farm work, and he wanted something that was not as backbreaking as farm work. So he ended up in doing service work, which is equally difficult. So we would travel back to Mexico to visit family often because my family's from there. And so we're here in Guadalajara, and I really love this photo too because it's one of the few photos I have of myself with my mother, and a sort of very happy sort of moment enjoying being with family, and also because it's one of the few photos I have as well with my mother, because my parents, when I was similar to Yvette, we had a death in the family. So both my parents were killed in a car accident when I was 12. We were in a car accident, and my grandmother also passed away. So it's one of the few very happy moments that I have in remembering my mother. So that's why it's special to me to look back to that picture. And that's another thing that also, like I said, with Yvette and I, that we had that. Whenever you meet people who've had similar, very traumatic experiences with you, there's like a real bond. I think and I've read a lot about that, and I see that that happens. So, and then lastly, is a picture of myself with my oldest child, Eli. I think they were, 12, 13, and we're at the Natural History Museum in LA, and we love to take both our kids out. My spouse is here with me as well. And we love to take our kids out to show them as much as we can. I always tell them when they're now in college, I said, you're not first gen, you need to get it, and they're still like, oh. So we would take them to lots of places, to museums and things like that. But that place is also very special because I spent a lot of time there doing research at this, it's called the Seaver Center for Western History. It's on the basement of the Natural History Museum of LA. It's in front of USC. You go downstairs, and I spent many years there as a graduate student doing research, so it's still a very special place to go there. So all these things kind of say different things about me, but I'll share more about my story. So, next one. All right, so let's move on to the nitty-gritty here. I think you've probably heard enough of our stories. So, so the first thing is to think about what is grad school, right? So what is grad school? Sometimes I think it's really important to even define the basics, because sometimes I think we just assume people know, but it's not always necessarily the case. So when we're talking about grad schools, any advanced academic degree that goes beyond the undergrad degree. So that can include post-baccalaureate programs, master's programs, and PhD programs, or doctoral programs. And I think what we want to do now is to talk about the differences between a master's and a doctoral program, and the key differences between these two programs. Sometimes I think we're not aware, and because they're important in different ways. So the master's degree can be programs from 1 to 2 years generally. Sometimes it'll lapse into 3 years, because if you're writing the thesis, a master's thesis, that can take an extra year. Also, most programs don't provide much funding, little to no funding, depending if you're really good at negotiating, but we can talk about that later. They're looking for, when you apply, they're looking for experience and skills. When you apply, that's what they're looking to see, if you have those traits in your application. And these master's degree programs are often necessary to advance in management positions and generally non-academic careers. So that's what masters generally go for. In terms of the doctoral degree programs, those are much longer than master's programs, certainly 4 to 10 years. I would say 10 years is when you're doing, a lot of times in the humanities, they take longer because you have to work, and so things get, depending on your personal situation. They're usually fully funded. You can expect, if you get into a PhD program, that PhD program will cover your fees and a stipend, at least for the first 5 years, 4 to 5 years. They usually don't take people without any funding. They require experience, skills, and also to have expertise in your particular subject, right? If you are going for a degree in music, they want to know that you have a background in music. So that's really important, looking at your undergrad. Or your, even if you take gap years, right? You go out for a few years, you're doing other kind of work. They want to see that expertise in that area. And PhDs are necessary for research and academic careers. But also, it's definitely transferable to non-academic careers, and that is certainly much more the trend, like to go into not to be a professor or in academia, because one, those positions are much smaller and smaller, and it's not always what people want to do, and we can make change in many other areas, right? Whether it's industry, government, health, all kinds of, the nonprofit sector, many different areas. The next slide is about thinking about whether you should apply. I'll just pause here and say one thing, is that Yvette really taught me about this, should I apply? I was in the mindset when I was an undergrad, I was finishing up. It's like as our speaker, the vice chancellor said, that, what now when you're finishing up, right? So I was in my 4th year finishing up in undergrad at UCLA, and I thought, like, well, what do I do now? And so I had done some research, and I really enjoyed it, and I just thought that was what I had to do, right? But I think with Yvette's coaching and experience, she said, no, people should think about whether it's the right choice for them. Do I need a PhD for my career objective? Think about, what is it you want to do? What kind of ideas do you have? It's hard to know. Even when we're in grad school, we don't know we want to do grad school every week. I mean, literally every week I would question what I'm doing. And thinking about whether you need a PhD or a graduate degree for your particular career. Do you need an advanced degree to have access and ascend the ranks of your intended profession? So does it give you mobility, right? Mobility within your wherever you're ending up to work, does that advance? You might look at the higher, if you want to go into admin, do they have PhDs? What are their degrees? So think about that. You might also think about what other people have done. Like, say you see somebody, you really look up to them, a role model, like, wow, I really want to affect change at that level. What have they done? What kind of degrees do they have? What are their experiences? So that's really important. And is it possible, sometimes you don't need to do a graduate program. You can gain experience by doing other things in other fields. So that becomes another option without spending all that money, because it's very expensive.
All right. So now we're going to talk about the pros and the cons of if you decide to pursue a PhD in particular. If you're pursuing a PhD, the great thing is that you are earning the highest level credential possible. No one can take this away from you, no matter what. So I'm always going to be doctora. I will forever be doctora because I have that PhD. The next thing is that you are developing advanced research skills. Not everybody needs advanced research skills, but if you need them or if you want them, this is a great opportunity to pursue that because it's really challenging to get that same level of training otherwise. This includes with folks who go into industry careers in research. It is especially helpful to have that PhD training. You also get to become a subject area expert. So if you're passionate about something, if there's a topic that you love, you can study anything and become a subject area expert in that. And then, of course, depending on the jobs that you're interested in, having that advanced degree might either be required or highly desirable. That was true when I applied for the assistant director of McNair program at UC Santa Barbara. Having a PhD was not required, but it was highly desirable, and it set me apart from other candidates. So keep that in mind, and then also in some industries and in some jobs, you also have the potential to earn a higher income. And I say in some because that's not true across the board. Now, in terms of the cons, there is an opportunity cost that comes with spending years of your life going to graduate school. So this is true for folks who decide to take time off of work to pursue graduate school full-time. This isn't necessarily always the case, especially for some folks who are non-traditional and choose to keep working while they're pursuing their advanced degree. That may not impact you as much. Also, there are some folks here who might be thinking, actually, do we have anyone who's already thinking of pursuing a PhD? Yes? Any folks who are interested in becoming professors? One, at least one? Okay. So for folks who check out the recording and also for the person who's interested in becoming a professor here today, keep in mind there is the stark reality that there are fewer and fewer tenure track positions available. So even if you are a highly qualified candidate, there's no guarantee that you are going to land a tenure track job. And for some people who decide to keep trying every year to go on the job market to get that professorial job, sometimes that can lead to underemployment where you're not working full-time or you're not making a full income, salary, or wage. And this means that it's important to explore multiple career paths. The other thing too, again, assuming that you're taking time away from the workforce to pursue graduate school full-time, this does mean that you might have a delayed entry into the job force compared to your peers. So if you're someone who goes, like I did, straight in from undergrad to a PhD, you'll see your peers landing jobs outside of academia, moving up in their careers, and you're here 2, 4, 6, 8, sometimes even 10 years later, still completing the same program. And so it's something just to keep in mind, because if you know this ahead of time and you still want to do the PhD, you can go in very level-headed with your eye on the prize of, I'm just going to go in, I'm going to finish in 5 years, I'm going to network or talk to people, and I'm going to land that coveted job that I want. And then the last thing is, you'll hear from us that we are anti-student debt. We're not proponents of student debt by any means. But in some cases, we can't not mention that some folks do accrue debt. And this happens if you don't get full funding or you don't negotiate for additional funding, or if you're going to grad school somewhere like California where there's a high cost of living. So keep that in mind. Again, if you know this in advance, then you can do what you need to do to be proactive about making sure that you don't take on student debt or additional student debt if you have some debt as an undergrad. Okay, so I already told you pros and cons. Let's say you know the pros and cons and you're still thinking, I'm going to go to grad school. What comes next? It's really, really important, no matter what program you go into, master's or PhD, that you get relevant experience. What do I mean by relevant experience? Depending on the industry or field that you want to go into, you may want to apply for research programs. In fact, for most of them, it's an added plus to have research experience. For some more applied programs, you will want to have internship experience or more applied job type of experience. That's also a benefit. Depending on your field, again, you want to be intentional about the courses that you're taking. So maybe you're going into economics and you're thinking, oh, for economics, for this degree, they really want me to be solid in my math background. So then you want to take additional math courses. Or if you're in another field and they want you to have certain software or certain skills, you can take that research methods course in advance. The other thing I want to say, and this is actually something that I want to make sure you listen up because I think it's super important, is that you can also create your own opportunities. And I'll give you an example. Several years ago, at this point it's probably been like 8 years ago maybe, I don't know, 6 to 8 years ago, I was working with a student who really wanted to complete a summer research program. And so she worked with us, worked hard on her applications, applied to all these summer research programs, and didn't get into a single program. But she was on a mission. I'm gonna do research in a campus outside of my campus. And so she asked us, the McNair program, if we would sponsor her to then go out and create her own program. So she reached out to local universities and contacted a professor that she wanted to work with and told her that she would volunteer her time at the lab in exchange for her mentorship. And lo and behold, we helped her craft an email to pitch herself. So remember, you can pitch yourself for opportunities to create things that don't even exist. And the professor said yes. Later on, this same student ended up applying to only 2 graduate programs. She made me so nervous, only 2. She got into both, and one of them, guess what? It was that same program with the same professor who worked with her, and she got admitted to both. So keep this in mind. I hope that in the back of your head, you're like, oh, what can I even create for myself? Because it is a possibility. All right, so now let's say you got some experience. Let's say maybe you're thinking of even applying next fall, or some of you might even be applying right now. We don't know. One of the most important parts of the process is making sure that you have a solid grad school list. What do we mean by this? You want to make sure that you don't just go and Google top 10 programs in my industry, in whatever discipline you're part of. You don't want to just do that. Don't stick to the top programs. Why do we say this? Because you need to make sure that you are, quote unquote, the right fit for that program. So that means you have to make sure they have people there that you would be enthusiastic to work with. You want to make sure they have the skills and the resources. Maybe you want to make sure that they have certain type of programs that are going to help someone like you, depending on your identities or your interests. And so how do you find these programs? One thing is to ask around. Ask your professors, ask your TAs, ask people you know to see what programs they recommend, because they know better than you if they're already in the field. 2 is, if you are currently an undergrad doing research, and I know we have at least a couple of McNair scholars here, perhaps other students doing research right now, you are going to run into some of the same names over and over again in your scholarship. So find those people. Who are the people that keep coming up? Where are they now? And then look up under their education section, where did they get their PhD? Where did they get their training? And add those to your list. So then go check those out. Go check out the faculty there, and that'll help you narrow it down to the right programs. And then, of course, we want to mention, because we have first-gen students here, and I know as a first-gen student myself, it was really hard for me to consider graduate programs that were too far away from family because of family responsibilities. We want to acknowledge that you can, and in some cases should, consider your geographic restrictions to think about, if I realistically am not going to move to Kansas for grad school, then what are the programs near me or within the regions I'm willing to move to that have the people and, again, the programs that I want to work with. And then the other thing too, aside from geographic restrictions or preferences, you also want to think about your non-negotiables. What are your non-negotiables? Is it my program has to be diverse? They have to have a certain type of population? They have to be an HSI? Is it they have to have a first-gen program? Is it they have to have family housing or subsidized student housing? Is it you get to figure out what your priorities are. And you don't know this unless someone tells you what your options even are. So we're saying this just to encourage you to think about, wait, hold up, what even can I consider? I had someone actually send me an audio message. One of my profesora friends, she's at San Jose State, saying, Yvette, I've got a student. He's older. He's already working full-time. He wants to go back to grad school, but he's worried about his health insurance. Can you tell us a little bit more about health insurance options? And what I told her was, you know what? Health insurance is not the same across the board, across institutions. So if that's your priority, you can even look into that. Talk to grad students at those programs and ask them, what's your health insurance like? What do you get covered? What do you not get covered? So you get to decide your non-negotiables. And then the last thing I'm going to say about this, and then we'll move on because I can be chatty, is to prioritize fit and people over prestige. I had someone on my podcast, the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. I'm trying to remember her name. Her name is Doctora Ariel. I'm blanking out on her last name. But in any case, she came to talk about the grad school application process because she's also supported a lot of folks in that. And she has a really big following on her social media. And she used that phrase, people over prestige. So I want to kind of, shout her out because I love that phrase of make sure you prioritize finding programs that have the right people, because with the right people, you're going to succeed. Without that, you can be at the top program, you can be going to Harvard and Stanford, and guess what? It's going to be a lot harder for you to finish if you don't have people who have your back, who are going to vouch and advocate for you. So let's keep going.
I do love Yvette's, she calls it her chattiness, but her stories are really wonderful because she works with so many people in this process. So the next thing I'm going to be talking about are recommendation letters. And I know it's a lot we're throwing out at you here, but we're hoping that this is, it's all meant for us to empower you, right? So hopefully trying to put you first, and I think that that's, as we don't get that very often for sure. So the next thing is the recommendation letters, and I know those are always, it's, on one hand you feel like you're in control, on the other hand you feel you're not in control because what are they going to say or how are they going to respond in this. So letters of recommendation are essentially detailed letters that an endorsement on behalf of usually a professor that's talking about your strengths, your attributes, and your potential to succeed in graduate school and your specific chosen field. What's really important for letters of rec is what I tell students is like the more detailed they are, the more specific things they can say about you, the stronger the letter. So I've read lots of letters of recommendation over the years, and when I see, like, for instance, a one-pager, that's okay, but, or big, sometimes they do this like big spacing and just, that's not, actually kind of hurts you a little bit, I think, more than it helps, because you're like, oh, this person didn't, why did they choose this person? Because obviously they haven't read, they don't know much about them. So letters of rec do matter. So there's kind of some work to be done with letters of recommendation. Okay, the next thing is about, it does matter who writes your letters of recommendation for most graduate programs, I would say masters and PhDs. That is, they look for people who have PhDs. Not all of your letters have to be all from people with PhDs, but in certain cases, they don't have to be. But okay, so it's looking for people who are in the tenure track. Potentially, you can use people who are lecturers on the campuses, because we have so many faculty or instructors that are lecturers or not tenure track faculty. But also, you could, if you've been working at a full time and your employer is well known in the field, they can also write a letter for you. That's really important. So that could be one part of your portfolio of letters of recommendation. And it's okay, sometimes we think like, oh, I'm gonna ask the same person again for a letter. It's actually better to have somebody who already has a draft, a template, we could say, of a letter. So it's okay to go back to them like 10 times because they just change a few things here and there. They will tweak the letter to whatever program that you are applying to. So don't feel like, oh, I'm bothering them so much. It's actually, you build that relationship and it's expected. I expect the same person to come back to me. And normally that person will give me a list of places that are applying to, deadlines and so forth. And so that just helps me keep track. But I still tell them to send me a gentle reminder because, I have these multiple things. So they'll usually send me an update about when that's due. And so the other part of this, it's important to start building these relationships early in your career if possible. The more time you get to know them, they get to know you, the richer and deeper that letter is going to be. So if you, of course, there's no time, you can just start now, it's fine. It's not like the past is past, but just know that that's important to do to start cultivating those relationships. Let's see. All right, so the next component that's kind of hefty for the application, if you're thinking about grad school, is the application essays. Normally, there's the two essays. I'll talk about statement of purpose and the personal statement. The diversity statement is also becoming more and more common. But first, the statement of purpose sort of conveys your academic, your research, and your career interests and your goals, right? And how they align with that particular program that you're applying to. So you talk there about the specifics of the kind of research that you want to do, what are the different components, what you hope to contribute. If you can, hopefully you're at that stage where you're like, this is how this work is going to make a difference. Because that's ultimately, in academia, it's all about what you're going to bring that's new and different, right? The contribution. If you haven't heard this phrase, the so what question, which is the hardest thing. It is one of the hardest things to write, right? Which is that claim of significance. Why is your work significant? Not just your argument, right? Because we usually don't get to our argument until we've written the whole thing. Then I'm like, oh, that's what I'm trying to say. That's me. Until I finish, then I'm like, well, oh, okay, now I know what I'm arguing. It's a process, right? This writing is thinking. But the contribution, the claim, like what are you going to bring that's new and different, that's really hard. But so that's what they want to know. And if you can kind of put it out there or at least hint at it, it's hard. It's really hard to say like why your work is important. But if you can make that argument of like nobody's, not just like the filling a gap, like, so there's lots of gaps. We don't need to fill every gap, right? But how is that going to make a difference, right? So think about that. It takes time to get to that. And sometimes somebody has to help you. So, the second thing you're going to be writing is usually a personal statement. They'll ask you to talk about how your personal experiences, your background, your trajectory, how that has contributed or spurred you, motivated you to follow this path that you want to follow. So it could be any examples from your past. It could be more present things. It could be something you read. It could be, numerous kinds of things and how they dovetail in what you want to do in the future, how that's motivated you. And this essay, just like the statement of purpose, it takes time. You can't just sit down and bang it out one night. It'll evolve. You have that draft. You'll use it because then you'll be applying for, grants or fellowships, or you want this position. You just use that same one. You just keep working it and working it and working it. So once you have that first draft down, then you can just retool it, right? So that not every time you're not going to reinvent the wheel every time. There are some exceptions because some applications, will ask you some off questions. You're like, a little bit different. And then lastly will be this diversity statement that I'm not sure how often grad programs ask for them, but lots of places are asking for them. And essentially it's asking you to talk about how your personal background, your research, your teaching, any ways in which you have helped to diversify higher education or academia or the classroom. You could be a tutor, any space, not just in, maybe in your church group, in your community. Maybe you've worked one-on-one with people in different spaces. Maybe you've, there's many different ways you can talk about your diversity statement. Also in your research, what are you choosing to research, right? Like for myself, my first book was on Mexican women in California in the 19th century. So I was like, well, I want to, all of my research subjects are among the most marginalized people in United States history, right? So I've studied Mexican women, Mexican and black boys in juvenile detention centers and migrants. So it's not just enough to say, oh, I'm here and I'm diversifying this space. It's like, oh, it's not going to cut it. You need to show what have you done, right? So that's will be for your diversity statement. The other components of the grad application that usually we'll see will be the GRE. They'll want to see your score. Most programs, I don't even know what, maybe 75 to 80% don't require GREs. I think some in the STEM field do. I think some social programs do. That's why I was a little surprised at sociology. I know in history, we don't, but generally they're not required, but you should still look into that definitely. A writing sample, so if you've done some research or maybe in a class that you did pretty well, you really like that piece. If you want to go into creative writing, then certainly it would be something in that field. They'll want to see what we call a CV, a curriculum vitae, or I don't know how you say vita, vitae. If it's not a resume, it's different. It's like it forefronts your educational experiences. So it'll talk about your research experience, if you've done any teaching, tutoring, your awards, things like that. There's a lot of online samples that you can find. Also, in case you're in different fields, if you're in the arts and music and humanities, they might ask you for a portfolio of your samples of art. Any demos, like teaching demonstrations, maybe even auditions will be videos that they might want. I think it's...
All right, so now you know what you are expected to submit when you're applying. But what even are admissions committees looking for? Because we get questions all the time about, I'm not going to get in because of my GPA. I'm not going to get in because I don't have enough letter writers. Or I'm not going to get in, like so many reasons that we are rejecting ourselves. But in actuality, there's no way to truly know what each admissions committee member is looking for. But what we can say is this. Odds are you probably are exposed to the undergraduate admissions process, and you might have some familiarity about how the process of applying to grad school, how the process of applying to college, what that looks like. You apply, everything gets submitted to an admissions office, and they have readers, and they have criteria, they review your applications, but you're among a pool of thousands of people all submitting their applications to one place. For graduate school, there is no one central admissions committee that reviews every single application. Yes, your application will go to an office that might be like a graduate division type of office, but from there, the applications themselves get sent to departments. And it's the departments that decide. It's not staff members, it's professors that decide. And the reason I'm saying this is because this is why it's so crucial for you to look up the people, to find out who they are, to maybe even meet them. So that way they know who you are, they remember you, they remember your name. And so all this to say, I said, we don't know what they're looking for. It is complex, their criteria might be different. Every department prioritizes different things. But here's one thing that we can say. It has become more of a trend for anyone reviewing graduate school applications to review it through what we call a holistic review. And by that, we mean where admissions committee members are taking into account all of the aspects of your application so that no one single thing is going to rule you out. I can't say this is true across the board. It's a trend. So there might still be programs that say you have to have a minimum GPA score of X to get in, or you have to have a minimum GRE score of X to get in. But if they're not saying that, don't reject yourself. If they're not saying that, if you know you have a gap, you know, oh, my GPA is not that great, or they're requiring the GRE and I bombed it, there are other components of your application that you can focus on to strengthen and to balance that out. And here, I want to mention this again because it just comes up so often that no, your GPA is not the single determining factor of whether or not you're going to get into graduate school. I've seen folks with 4.0s not get in anywhere, and I've seen folks with 2.8s get into a top program. And guess what was the determining factor? How hard they worked on their application essays and the quality and level of relationships that they had with the faculty members that wrote their letters. So all of this to say that if you are first gen, if you are BIPOC, if you're a non-traditional student, and you're already feeling like, I'm not gonna get in, that's not true. There are so many different components about you, about your story that you can highlight that no one else can talk about in their applications that can make you stand out. All right, so I think we're back to you.
Thank you. All right, so now we're going to talk a little more in detail about funding. So let's talk about the differences between master's versus PhD funding. If you're admitted into a PhD program, you can expect to receive full funding and to receive what we call multi-year funding packages, which can be a combination of TA-ships, RA-ships, and fellowship years. I know in my department, history, and most departments on our campuses and the UCs will accept students with funding only. Like if there's a certain amount of a pot of money, and we sort of hate to say this, it's a ranking of students, and then they get the top students and they'll parse out the funding, and then they'll put the other students on the waiting list. But they won't admit somebody without any funding. They don't want somebody to come in and take huge amounts of debt and just not be able to. There's no way, that's just not sort of, I think, ethical to do that. But there are a number of, again, the PhD programs, you will have funding at least usually 4 or 5 years, even 6 years, people are able to get funding. If you're admitted to a master's program, usually you will expect to receive little internal funding. There's some, don't quite know the full details, but apparently the master's programs help fund the PhD programs because they know people will be out in professional fields and making money right after 2 or 3 years, whereas PhDs will take longer. And so I know that master's programs, There's not that much funding, but if you need to ask, because we've had that, I know Yvette has encouraged a lot of our former McNair students to ask, and then all of a sudden, oh, I got this, I got 10,000. Oh, now they're covering this quarter. Oh, I'm going to TA the second. So they managed to find it. You just need to push with master's programs to see what kinds of opportunities are available to you. In terms of other kinds of ways to gain funding, on campus-wide positions, you can do, sometimes there's work study available for graduate students to work as an advisor or a mentor. You can work, get an hourly wage along with tuition waivers. So in McNair, we have 3 graduate mentors, actually 3 graduate students who work with us, and they get all their fees covered, and then they do hourly work with mentoring our students. So they love that. It's different. You get experience outside of your department. You're not just TAing. So a TA, you all might have had some TAs who do that work. So they're grad students. So it's nice if you want other kind of experience. Also, if you want to be out of your department. Not everybody loves their department, so you get to meet other students. So our students, one's from film, one's from counseling psychology, the other one is in education. So you get to meet grad students from across. It's pretty cool. The other thing you can do, again, the TA, you could be a TA in your department or outside of your department. Like on our campus, I know departments of Chicana and Chicano Studies is always recruiting TAs from other departments, so that's more of your jam, like I want to do this. You can find other TA-ships in other, outside of your department. You can also, some folks, somebody I just spoke to a couple days ago, she was a professor at a community college as a grad student, so she did that for quite a while. And now she got a postdoc at UCLA, and she's now on her way to Utah. This is Catherine Maldonado. I just saw her. It's amazing. And she's a mother. She has 3 children, 3 boys, and she's going off to Utah. So, also, some people do off-campus employment, sometimes full-time, part-time. It's more common among non-traditional students to do this, but that's also something that people do to get through graduate school. Other things to think about for funding, you might be more familiar. Of course, there's federal loans, but again, as Yvette said at the beginning, we don't encourage people, if possible, to take out loans, but there's availability of subsidized and unsubsidized, but I understand there's more restrictions now on unsubsidized than in the past. I was very fortunate in grad school. I had funding through affirmative action, so different packages, but my last year I did have to take out a loan. And it's interesting how it was just for 1 year, yet that loan lasted like a long time to pay it off. There's also, again, private loans is another last resort. The interest rates are super high on those. But again, you might look into that as a last sort of option. Okay, I think.
All right. So it's really important to know what your funding options are in grad school so that nothing surprises you when you're there. But you want to make sure you get your ROI. You want to make sure you get your return on investment. And I hate to be a broken record, but I have to remind you that it is really, really important for you to build up your support network. Or if you don't like the word network and networking, you can call it build your community. How do you do it? Well, when it comes to networking, I like to rephrase it as community building or even just connecting with people. It's important for you to nurture relationships. Right now, we can nurture relationships with professors because those are the folks that you have access to. You can nurture relationships by creating a LinkedIn profile and talking to industry professors so that way you can find out more about what the field is like. You can be even... Oh.
Is it not responding to me either?
Oh,
It's not.
that's okay. We can try over here because the clicker's not working.
Yeah, keyboard's not responding either.
Oh. Next. Here we go.
Is that the right one?
Oh, you're doing it? Are you doing it from up here? Okay. Yeah, this one's it. Okay, thank you. Should I sit down and you got it? Okay. Having a theater background, you're like never phased because you know the show has to go on. You have to learn to improv. I did improv for a little while, and then I was part of a comedy troupe in college, and then I realized that most of the time people aren't laughing with me, they're laughing at me. So in any case, thanks for your patience as we figured out the slides. So going back to the point about networking and nurturing relationships, I was going to say that You can be intentional, or I might even dare to use the word strategic, about the relationships that you build with professors. If you know you're going to go to grad school, you can think about, who do I want to write my letter of rec? And based on the people that you want to write your letter of rec, you can take their classes, go to their office hours, send them emails, let them know who you are so that they remember you. That way, this time next year when you're asking for a letter of rec, it doesn't come as a surprise. You're not a stranger to them, and if anything, they'd be thrilled to write you a letter. The other thing I want to mention is that sometimes it's good to form relationships with professors because they can help to fill gaps. Not every campus is the same. Not every campus has the same level of resources. And so maybe your campus is missing out on certain resources, like, for example, maybe career services might not be, I'm not saying that about this campus, but certain campuses have very small career services office. So it helps to talk to professors from different majors, different departments to get insights on different fields. So you just want to think about that, like, how can I best make use of my time and the relationships that I build on this campus while I'm still here? Next slide. The next thing I want to mention is this idea that no one mentor can suit all of your needs. Sometimes people think, I got to find the right mentor, I got to find the perfect person, and then you find someone and they don't suit all your needs. Maybe they don't understand your first-gen experience. Maybe you feel like you can't talk to them about your personal issues. Maybe they know so much about the field that they don't know anything else about another interest of yours. So all of this to say that when you think about mentors and developing relationships, you don't want to be one and done, because there are so many other people who are willing to help you out. And one of the things that you can do is something that one of my own mentees taught me. I had a meeting with a mentee recently, and he told me, oh, you know what, Yvette, I was filling out my mentor map, and you came up in multiple categories. And I was like, Bryant, what's a mentor map? And he's like, oh, you don't know what a mentor map is? I was like, no, show me. He showed me. And then I was like, that is so cool. Where did you get it from? Of course, I'm adding the source because that's where he got it from. But all this to say that in this mentor map, you can see visually that people fill different needs. You can have role models. You can have people who can provide a safe space. You can have folks who provide emotional support. You can even have folks, these are the folks that can give you substantive feedback on your writing and on your research. You can have folks who are part of your intellectual community who get your field. And you can even have folks like the amazing staff members who put on this event today and our sponsors, who maybe they could help you with your professional development too. So keep all of that in mind, and maybe even fill out your own mentorship map while you're at it.
So I will continue with that theme about mentors and how important they are. And I think Yvette sort of touched on it as well. But the big question I still get, earlier this week I was at another event with postdoctoral fellows, people who finished their PhDs and so forth, and they're still asking the same question: how do I find a mentor? How do I build my network? And so definitely finding a mentor, reaching out to them is not easy. So I would say definitely to build your strength and to take the initiative to try to do that, right? To really like, okay, just gonna like, I know some of us are introverts, or there's other things that hold us back sometimes. And so, so you kind of need to take that initiative to say, okay, I'm going to compose that email, or I'm going to ask somebody to help me. But of course, you need to let it grow organically, that relationship, and I'll say a little bit more about that. First thing I think you should do is to look at people's track record with mentees, or pay attention to who they've worked with, who have they, what are their areas of interest, is that aligned with yours? Even it doesn't have to be the main one, it could be something around maybe emotional wellness. You like that the way that they, they practice mindfulness, and you're really interested in that, and so you want to talk to them about that. So it doesn't have to be about your academics per se. Another point I think is kind of related to this is to pay attention to how they move in the world. That is, where do they show up? What matters to them? Are they at the same places that you are sometimes? Do you see them in these, maybe you go to talks that they happen to be there often, or events. So that to me says a lot about the person. Like, as the saying goes in Spanish, tell me who you're, something like, tell me who you're with and I can tell you who you are, kind of thing. And so I think that to me says more than like their titles or their prestige or that kind of thing. right? Also, think about that while affinity and identity markers are really important, I know those are like number one for me, but also I think you need to look at shared values or their mission. So perhaps, especially as you sort of go into PhD programs or you go into these spaces where there's fewer and fewer people that look like us, you need to like also look at maybe there's folks there who have similar objectives or similar missions, especially like in my space as a full professor. I find very few women of color at my rank or in my spaces, and so there's I found a mentorship with white women professors or deans who I know, who I like the way that they move and the kinds of things. So I turn to them and I say, hey, can you help me? And they're so happy to help a woman of color, for the most part. I guess I go to the right people because they're very forthcoming, and so, that's something to consider as well. Also, you might ask for referrals, so you don't know who to ask for, you don't want to do it on your own. Ask somebody, hey, is there somebody you think you could help me out? Who would be a good person for me? And so hopefully this trusted person can refer you to that individual. And lastly, don't give up. I would say it takes a long time to find those right mentors. And so I'm very I don't want to say pessimistic, but I'm over critical, okay, who's that person? It takes me a long time to let that person, I don't just accept anyone. But I think it's good to have those, the ears up, to get people will give themselves away pretty easily too, I think. So if something doesn't feel right, it's because something's coming down. So pay attention to your gut, right? Your gut always tells you those things. I think that's important. In terms of the next slide, the nurturing relationships, thank you. Again, it's important to follow up. Sometimes it's good to make that initial, hey, let's talk. But how do you continue? Even with Yvette and I mean, the book definitely has kept us together, but I'm always happy when I see people later I should contact you. Why do I wait 10 years, So following up is important. Having regular meetings with the faculty mentor is important. If you could do that, continue to see them, maybe through study groups or maybe co-working with peers. There's different ways to keep those relationships nurtured. You might send them email updates. Sometimes I get those from students, and I'm like, why? They're sending that to me. Even I have to remind myself, that student. And it's so great, especially us. When you see students from many years past what they're doing now, tell them what you're doing. They get so excited, that person. I always tell my husband, so-and-so did this. Even they had a baby, whatever, they're doing. It's just great to hear from them. Believe me, people want to hear because they feel like they put their little grain of sand in you, and they want to see that, come to life. So don't feel shy about sharing your, your fortunes, however that might turn out for you. I think that's the last point, how they've influenced you. And so lastly, a point that Yvette has shared with me, and I think it's that we learned from one of her former students from from UCSB and UCLA, right? He's Jamal, he has a great network, and he said, essentially told Yvette that he follows up with people who say, if I can help you in any way, he takes people up on their word. And I also saw him on Monday, and he's doing great. He's a postdoctoral fellow in education. And so if people say, hey, email me anytime, I go, okay, I will, and do it, because take them for their word.
Shout out to Dr. Jamal Muwakil, because he's the one that taught us that lesson of take people at their word. We're getting ready to wrap up, and so just making sure we're good with the slide. The last things that we want to leave you with in terms of final takeaways are we want to make sure that if you decide to go to grad school, that this is an informed decision, that you get to be the one to decide whether or not grad school makes sense for you, not someone else, not your professors, not your parents, not your friend. It should be your decision. The second thing is you want to make sure you keep finding the experiences that make sense for you for where you want to go next. So gain that relevant experience, apply to opportunities. If those opportunities aren't there, create them for yourself. Next is look for programs that offer the kind of support that you need. So you might want to be prioritizing first-gen support. You might be prioritizing support for specific identity markers. You might even be looking for support based on your interests and the skills you want to learn. And so figure out what you want to get out of your programs ahead of time. And then, of course, we just finished talking about mentorship. Find mentors. We know it's not easy. We know there aren't a lot of people that look like us, and that as we move up, in our careers, it's less and less people. We know that's true, but for now, do your best to talk to faculty, to staff, to grad students. I know it's also not easy because you probably have a full life. You probably have a lot of responsibilities. You probably have multiple side gigs. I know, I've been there. But make sure that you prioritize that just as much as you prioritize your academics, because it is part of this process. And then, I'll leave you with building a support network. The support network doesn't even just have to be within your campus community. That can include your loved ones. That can include your family. That can include your friends. That can include your peers. It's everybody who has got your back, and lean on them. Don't be afraid to ask for help, because one day they might ask for help, and I'm sure you're going to be there for them too. So that is it for our talk today. Before we let you go, we want to make sure that you share some feedback, and we want to incentivize it. If you want a copy of today's slides instantly, please take 2 minutes. Literally, it won't take longer than 2 minutes to fill out our feedback form so we can hear from you. And then afterward, you'll instantly get taken to the PDF with a copy of today's slides. And if you don't want to share feedback, that's okay. We don't feel bad about that. You can instead get one of your index cards and think of a question you want to ask us. And after the next 2 minutes, we'll transition to Q&A.
Yes, thank you so much. So go ahead, and there's should be cards in front of you, pens. Go ahead, and if you have any questions, or I don't know if we should also take live questions.
Yeah, we can take live questions.
Yeah, maybe we can start by taking some live questions, and then as people have questions that they're afraid to ask.
We can also have, and then if you have a flashcard with the question that you want us to read aloud, feel free to show it off, so that way we can get someone to pick up the flashcards, and then we can also start taking questions that way.
Hello? Okay, hi. It was just a quick, so I have 2 semesters left here at Cal Poly, and I just wanted a little bit more information, or I had a question in regards to the experience. How much experience are we technically supposed to have? Because I know a lot of the programs that I've been looking into are, in general, just trying to find experience. They tell me, oh, well, you already need to have experience. But then I'm stuck, okay, I don't have any. I'm looking for the experience. Where can I go to apply? I've applied at many different mental health clinics because I'm a psychology major. So I just want to know what kind of is I don't know, a stance or something on that, if that makes sense. Or if I should, so let's say I finish school and then I take a year off just to work and get that experience, and then apply to a PhD program or a master's or something like that. Would that make sense?
That does make sense. Actually, it depends on your field and your discipline. In many fields, it's actually an advantage and a plus to take time to get that work experience. Yeah. A lot of folks also are afraid that maybe they find out about grad school a little too late, or they feel like it's too late. They're like, I only have 1 semester or 1 quarter. How am I going to do it? And I remember many, many years ago, I had a friend who, she had that same problem. She was like, Yvette, I wish I would have been like you and applied to research programs early on. Now I'm in my senior year. What can I do? And so I encouraged her to just for that last semester, because she was 2 quarters out, we were in the quarter system, to reach out to professors to see if anybody would take her to complete a research project in 1 quarter. That's just 10 weeks. Yeah. And so she reached out to a bunch of professors. 1 professor said yes. And so she completed a 10-week project, wrote a paper, used that professor to write use that experience to get a letter of rec from that professor, and used that paper that she wrote as her writing sample, then went on to apply to master's programs, and now has a full career in, I think she does labor studies related type of work. And all of this because she was encouraged to not think about it as I don't have enough time, and instead, what can I do with the time that I have left? And that includes if you're graduating and you're I literally don't have enough time, I'm about to graduate, thinking about, are there programs or experiences that I can apply to or that I can create for myself? You have no idea how many people will say yes to you if you reach out and tell them, I will work for you as an intern, I will work for you for free or for little, or I will like can we barter too, of like, you know what, I do need to get paid, but I can get paid in this other way. So I just want you to like consider those options, and also what you said in the beginning about taking that year, or sometimes it's more than 1 year, to get that experience. That's just as valid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a couple questions here. Thank you for, the first one is, do you feel like there's anything, do you feel like anything you would have changed or done differently when entering or being in grad school? What would you say is the most important thing to know when applying and entering grad school? So I would say in terms of the most important thing, let me see. I would combine the two questions for myself. So I know a mistake that I made, was applying to too few programs. I applied only to 5. I got into 1, and that was because the mentor I was working with at the time was at that university. So I was at UCLA undergrad, and I was working on a research project with him, and he essentially was, he vouched for me in the admissions, and said like, okay, this person, I've worked with them. They asked me for an extra writing sample because my writing wasn't up to what they expected. And so I had 1 year of funding. So he really, luckily he was very generous. But I would apply to more programs. And I tell all our McNair students, apply to more programs. In terms of what's the most important thing to know when entering grad school, I think we haven't mentioned this term or phrase, the imposter syndrome, the imposter phenomenon. I mean, that's real when you start in grad school, right? But just remember, everyone is, the really like ones who think that, are acting like they know everything, they don't. They're inside quivering. They're just like, everyone's there acting like they know what they got this, the first, and so you feel really intimidated, right? You feel like, oh my God, I'm totally, every day, that's what I said, every week, my first year in grad school, I felt like, what am I doing here? Go home and cry, I had a headache. I'm like, who are these Puritans? I don't know where they live. The Puritan mind, I'm like, what mind? It was just this big, like 300-pager. I had to read that and another book for the first week in one class. So you feel, and somebody's talking about Hegel in the class, I'm like, who's that? What? I have no idea what you're talking about. So yeah, you just have to like persist. Like you focus on your work. If you need help, you talk to the professor, but there's a lot of that happens, that posturing. So for me, I would just say if I would have known that, but there's many more.
I have such cringy, embarrassing moments in grad school. Like, I remember people talking about this leading, in the critical theory, they talked about Foucault, and I didn't know. I'm like, who's Foucault? And I called him Michael Foucault. And for anyone who knows the name, it was such an embarrassing moment because I didn't know. And that first-gen experience continues to follow you, not just in grad school, but even into your career. So just know that if you have experiences like that, it might feel embarrassing and shameful at first, but later on you'll learn to just kind of laugh it off and to understand that this is part of the process and that you get to own and be proud of that first-gen experience, of that identity too. I had someone, I met with someone, I remember, her name is Dr. Lisette Sanchez, she's a licensed psychologist, and she used the quote, "I'm first-gen, I collect firsts." I love that quote too because it reminds me everywhere I go, even if it's my first time doing it, I get to collect first and I get to make it easier for those that come after me. In terms of that question of like, is there anything that is the most important thing to know when applying and entering grad school, aside from the imposter phenomenon of like knowing like it's okay to feel like you don't fit in, like you were not made for these spaces and it's a big deal that you're even in this space. So aside from that, I also wish I knew that I had more options. I wish that I knew about concepts like life design, career development, of really thinking like, who am I? What am I good at? What are my strengths? And how can I transform that into the career options that I have? Because you don't have to just stick to what you know. There's so much more beyond what you even know now.
Before we take the next question, I'm going to ask if anyone needs a raffle ticket. If you need a raffle ticket, can you raise your hand and Lydia will bring you a raffle ticket? We're
Free
raffling.
books.
We're raffling a book
Oh, a book.
and a couple gift cards.
Oh, there we go. See, we got the hands up.
Thank you. Other questions? Any note cards we're missing?
I also want to add one thing as Yvette was talking. I know for me, a lot of ignorance, well, I just didn't know about what it took to get through grad school. But for me, ultimately, I think for a lot of my peers, like we knew why we were there, right? I remember we used to go around the room like, what are you studying? All of us were like, we're here, knowledge is power. We're here to tell our story, to recover these untold histories, at least, coming from history. It's about recovery, all this really important work, changing those textbooks, those history books. And there was a couple of our colleagues, peers, whatever, like, oh, I don't want to know, maybe I'll do this. And we're like, what? I don't know, that passion that we had for our project, we saw it as a greater mission, maybe we were high on our horse, I'm not sure. But that's what got me through at the end of the day. It wasn't like, in grad school, you don't get any pats on the back, there's no like, you're not famous, none of this, like going on social media, and well, you could, but I'm not really on social media. Like, I read this book, none of that, but I think it's just the drive, and at the end of the day, it's like the project, the commitment that you made to this project. So I used to tell myself, if I don't do this, who's going to recover these? Who's going to do this research that I want to do? So at the end of the day, it's not the glory of the fame in grad school. It's your project, right, that you are committed to doing this work.
If you don't have any questions, we're also happy to hear any comments or reactions to what we shared today. We'd love to hear from you. And again, you can write it in the index card, and we'll read it anonymously. If you're a little shy, that's okay. We've got 2 introverts speaking right now, so if I was on your side of things, I probably would be quiet too.
Yeah, one question.
Thank you. I really appreciate all your personal background experience and family experience. I think some of us are identified for the similar experience. Mm-hmm. So I am not traditional students. This is my first semester in Cal Poly Pomona. What is the best advice you can provide me to continue focus on my academy journal in this college and pursue my master in the future?
I think it, well, first, it depends upon the field that you're interested in talking about. I think we should connect with faculty at this point so that they can help guide you. And you would be able to form a relationship with them. And so if you're interested in grad school, that way then they can know that, and they put different kind of effort into your cultivating your development. So I think I like when students come to me early on and they say, hey, I'm interested in this path, and then you're able to, give them advice and they take it, and that's very satisfying. Okay, yeah, I'm helping you, and we're helping each other. Or you also don't have to take their advice, right? Of course, you can say that's not for me. But I think that's having that investment now, since you're just starting, that would be really good.
I want to say something similar. Just keep tapping into the resources, and also make sure that you have your family there to support you too. Because I'm sure it's a big deal and a big transition for you to come back to school, right? So making sure, whoever is part of your family, I don't know if you have kids, maybe not, or if you have extended family, et cetera, that you might be close to, making sure that you ask for help, especially during this time period where it is going to be challenging. It's hard to balance school and life. So lean into your support network at home, within your family and community, and also tap into the resources. There's so many resources on college campuses that even we aren't aware of, and then a lot of times you find out when it's too late, like when you're about to graduate. So just keep asking around to see what other resources are available that I can make the most out of. That includes talking to faculty. That includes even making friends with some of the younger generation and learning from them, because they have a lot to learn from you too. So don't do this alone, is what I'm saying. You have a lot of support. Just tap into that. In poco a poco, you're gonna do it. Before you know it, you're gonna be a graduate, and you'll be ready for what comes next.
So I think now might be a good time to transition. Will you join me in giving them a round of applause for this wonderful talk? And I'll ask our fabulous speakers to hang out in case folks want to get books signed or answer individual questions. Okay, thank you all so much.